where do we start, or where did you start? What's the minimum requirements to become a privately practicing midwife? Does it all have to be done in the hospital? Can we shadow a home birth midwife at all? How long did it take you, or will it take us? I mean, I guess, Cara, because you've had the most recent intro into that, these first couple of questions might be towards you, because I guess when, you know, us as students, and I'm not sure about, you know, some of the midwives on the Zoom today, but we don't really get a full overview of what's required, what you need to do, etc. So
yeah,
take it away.
I've been where you are for all the midwifery students. I was there, and it wasn't that long ago. And it was always my intention when I started studying the Bachelor of Midwifery that I'd move into private practice one day. That was the whole reason for doing it. And I found myself at the end of that third year of BMed going, how am I going to do this? And because in order to move into private practice, you need to be Medicare endorsed. You need to have an endorsement on your registration, yeah? And that sort of became necessary during my midwifery studies. Prior to that, it wasn't 100% necessary. So you need to have that endorsement, and in order to get that endorsement, you have to have 5,000 hours of clinical practice, which seems insurmountable when you are starting out, but really it's 3 years. It's 3 years of full-time practice. So I made the decision to just launch myself into it and get it done. And that probably wasn't awesome for my family, but it was a decision that we made that, yep, I'm just going to work full-time, and I'm going to chalk those hours up and get them under my belt. Yeah. So that's one way of doing it. I know there are other people who, you know, I think it is possible to work with a private midwife, but it's a difficult thing, and perhaps Melanie and Jane can talk more about that. But yeah, there isn't a clear pathway into private practice apart from doing your time in the hospital, and that is the simplest and most straightforward way of doing it, unfortunately.
Okay, so what are the rules? So you've just discussed already that you need the 5,000 hours. What are the other things? What are the best ways to navigate the system in order that we're ready? Like suturing, medications, cannulas, all of that kind of stuff. What else do you need to do? What else do we need to know to get ready?
So 5,000 hours plus the prescribing course as well. So it's a 1 semester postgraduate unit in prescribing that you have to do in order to get the endorsement along with your 5,000 hours. And yeah, that's what I did. I threw myself into learning all those clinical skills while I was in the hospital system, learning how to cannulate, learning how to suture, becoming confident in all those basic midwifery skills. Things like, and one of the private midwives gave me really good advice when I was starting out, saying that, you know, for example, like doing a vaginal exam. In private practice, you don't do them that often. But when you do them, you need to know what you're doing. So in that sense, actually working in the hospital for all those hours was really useful in just creating a foundation and a confidence in your own clinical skills. Yeah.
Great. Fantastic. So Melanie and Jane, I guess, you know, part of those questions are, you know, can we shadow a home birth midwife at all? How long did it take you guys? And I know it was probably different because all of that's come in recently, much more restrictions. So yeah, how did you guys come into it? Is that an option now for us to potentially navigate, or is it all needing to be done within the hospital system?
Yeah, I mean, so I came in before the 5,000 hour rule and before midwives even had insurance. So however, I want to just really confirm as well what Cara was saying about the 5,000 hours and actually seeing that as an opportunity to hone your skills and learn. You know, as private midwives, really, our role is usually if the woman needs help in an emergency situation, we step in. Otherwise, a lot of it, there's a lot of sitting back. So we have to be competent at stepping in when we need to, and that does involve being super skilled in vaginal exams and, you know, managing an emergency situation mostly. So I think take advantage of the 5,000 hours and get those skills and be confident and competent. How did I get in? I took a very unconventional path. I graduated and went straight into private practice. I didn't do a new grad year. I was fortunate that during my student years, I did community placement with Robin Dempsey and Jane Palmer. And so then they became my mentors, right, probably from when I was 6 months from finishing midwifery, and then continue to mentor me to this day, I reckon. So, you know, I think that's the way into private practice, is to really buddy up with some experienced midwives and learn from them. And so, yes, I don't think I would have been able to do what I did of just going straight from being a student into a private midwife without knowing there were people who were going to have my back. So that's my top tip, is mentorship.
Okay, fantastic. And Jane, obviously you've already provided that for Melanie, and you've got a program as well.
Yeah.
I guess, what is it that you recommend that we do prior to becoming privately practicing midwives? So, you know, obviously there's the 5,000 hours, but would you recommend as well maybe trying to do midwifery group practice or caseload, or even, you know, go through one of the Homebirth programs at one of the hospitals? So what do you recommend?
Okay, yeah, so I'll step back, and like Mel, I just made the decision. I think I was 1 year out from when I qualified, and I just stepped into private practice, but I was lucky we didn't have the requirements. And so, but I did, like Mel, choose some buddies and was mentored by them, you know, much more experienced midwives. So what I would suggest, if you can, while you are gaining, you know, your 5,000 hours in the system, is that to try and get some experience with a private midwife. If there's no one locally available, like we have people come from all over the world and come and spend time with us, even if it's just a couple of weeks or a month or something like that. So that's an option. And yeah, you probably just, I think it's not just the clinical skills that's important. Like suturing's important, cannulation's important, resus is important, but it's also about unlearning the hospital stuff, because no matter how much you know, I went into midwifery the same as Cara, and probably the same as Mel, that I was going to be a private midwife at the end. I wasn't going to work in the system. So I had that mindset, but you do get hospitalised, and you kind of need to unlearn a lot of that stuff, I think. Unlearn that hovering, that you know, the anticipation, because it's so different at home. It's really, really different. So that's what you get from budding with a private midwife, I think. I was thinking, what else? I mean, joining any of if you've got a local group, because I know there's different groups that's, you know, you can go, well, COVID's kind of put a hold on a lot of the get-togethers and stuff, but if you can find, you know, like-minded groups, your Homebirth groups or whatever, and spend time with them as well, you'll learn heaps. What else was I going to say? Oh, something else I was just thinking, I mean, the time you spend with a private midwife could be added, in theory, to the time you spend in the hospital, so you may be able to get it done quicker. Something I've been looking at, and I'm just waiting to hear back, is I've had 2 students approach me who do not want to work in the system, and looking at ways we may be able to do something. So they're prepared to attend Homebirth just for the Homebirth itself and not do any antenatal and postnatal care, so that gets them around the insurance requirements. But I'm looking at my practice here, because I'm a lactation consultant and do a lot of postnatal stuff and some just shared care stuff with the local hospital, looking at if the insurance companies, because I used to have an insurance policy that covered me for that, and so I'm trying to see if there is any way that I can do that. But yeah, hold this space. I haven't heard back yet. I've applied with 2 companies. I'm not holding my breath, but it's never hurt to ask. So
we'll definitely come back to that, because that's something that I think more midwives will be interested in. And also on that point that you were discussing, you know, one of the questions that came up was, you know, when you see normal birth, you can kind of, I guess, determine what's abnormal and therefore, you know, what's going wrong. So often in the hospital, we don't get that experience. Everything is seen as, you know, high risk or abnormal. There's so many kind of inductions and epidurals. So how do you gain that competence and that confidence in your ability? You know, I guess, Cara, was there any fear of going independent? You know, how did you know you were capable? How did you undo that, I guess, culture of fear that is within the hospital, that kind of, I guess, you know, what you were talking about, Jane, with just being institutionalized, I guess, within that time?
It's a tricky one, and I'm probably still undoing it. Like it's a process. Like Melanie and Jane have both said, I have experienced home birth midwives around me who are supporting me and guiding me and helping me. This is like, midwifery is not a thing that you just finish learning. It's always, every single woman presents differently. Her birth unfolds differently, and you're always learning. Now I forget what the question was. I
guess, how do you then determine, you know, what's normal? So, for example, you know, in all the hospitals, you have the active management of 3rd stage. Yet, in practice home birth, lots of women want physiological 3rd stage.
Yep.
So, you know, I've seen in my, you know, 18 years of being involved in birth that, you know, the protocol's gone down in the hospital from an hour and a half to an hour to half an hour to 15 minutes. So if you're kind of learning now as student midwives, right, placenta needs to be out within 15 minutes. That's just one example. This is happening in kind of every single setting. So how do you actually then, you know, gain that confidence to go, oh, what's normal, and how do we then navigate abnormal?
As a lot of my former hospital colleagues will attest, after almost every birth that I attended in the hospital setting, I would sit down and say, okay, how would that have gone differently if we hadn't intervened? What would have happened if we hadn't done this? What would have happened if we hadn't done that? And so that's a constant questioning, and sometimes chatting to home birth midwives and saying, how would you have managed that outside of the system? So I think it's good to build those networks now when you are practicing in the hospital. And from my experience, all of the private midwives are open and welcoming and always happy to chat and teach and pass their knowledge. And yeah, it's like a warm hug, the private midwifery community, I think. So it's about questioning, but what it comes down to basically is I trust women and I trust birth. And although working in the hospital system, it's sometimes hard to keep that trust, it's something that you kind of have to work at. I was fortunate as well that I spent quite a bit of time working in a really low risk setting, so the women that I was working with were probably comparable to the cohort of women that you're working with when you're providing home birth care. And that was really beneficial, I think, too. Those last couple of years before I went into private practice, I wasn't working in a major tertiary setting where you were dealing with really complex women all the time. And so I think that was a huge factor in enabling me to just kind of keep the faith, as it were. There are so many different settings you can work in as a midwife within the system. whether that be in a caseload model or a group practice model, or, you know, a low risk unit or a high risk tertiary unit. So I think it's good to get experience in all of them and understand the differences between them. But fundamentally, it's, yeah, I can tell you the first, like taking that leap, it was a big leap of faith and saying, you know what, I trust women, I trust birth, and let's hope that it all works out. That's pretty much that's pretty much how it happened.
Yeah, I think it's a really good tip about what you said about, you know, gleaning from all of them and, you know, gaining the experience that way as well, because even with the short time, I think often the feedback that I'm getting is the short time in the hospital, it seems so different to what we're taught about trusting birth. So, you know, it's very, very different culture, I guess, in that way. And then you guys are kind of answering quite a lot of these questions already. The next one I have is, do you guys work in New South Wales independently, as teams? Who supports you at the home birth? What's the dynamic? How does it work? Are you on your own? So as far as seconds and teams and that kind of thing, and then the relationship, I guess, if you need to transfer as well, how does that all work? I'm not sure who wants to start on that one, but yeah.
I could probably talk to that one. I've done both. I've worked in a group practice and also worked sort of, I don't like the word independently, because as private midwives, we're not really ever independent of someone to help us. So, I mean, there's a few ways you can do it, is to start as a private practitioner, but you can't really do that without having relationships with other private midwives, or at least other midwives who are willing to back you as a second midwife. So originally for me, it was Jane and Robin, my mentors. You know, if I'd book a birth, they'd come along and help me out with that. And then the group practice. So if you're part of a group practice, you know, there's an agreement that you're going to rely on each other to be backups. And then if you aren't in a group practice, then I guess your real priority would be to find midwives who are willing to back you, and then also be a reliable backup yourself. So if people can rely and trust in you to be there for them, then, you know, you can create a very reciprocal professional relationship where you can trust each other. So that would happen over time, but also with effort and investing in other midwives. And then, yeah, just agreeing that we really need to help each other, and we need to be united, because we don't have, you know, the support of a big group or an organization or a hospital. So yes, I think personally, be reliable and responsible for other midwives, and then, you know, you can only hope they're going to do the same for you.
Brilliant. And so, you know, given that you do need a second midwife to attend home births, if you're not part of, you know, like the group midwifery practice kind of setting, then do you just go through and, I guess, your own networks and find the second? Do they have to be endorsed midwife? You know, can a student be a second? What are the rules around that?
I'm happy to answer that. Yeah, look, no, a student can't be the second. It has to be a registered health professional that has skills in resuscitating a newborn. So that's the way I read it. I'm assuming that's how everybody else has read it. Yeah. So that could be a registered nurse with skills who has neonatal resuscitation skills. Could be, I suppose, an ambulance officer, a medical practitioner. But essentially, it could be another midwife. No, they don't have to be endorsed, but it's all around the rules of insurance. So as health professionals, we're required to have professional indemnity insurance. So because the only way you can get insurance currently is if you're endorsed. And so if you're not endorsed, you can't get insurance. The exemption for home birth is just for home birth. So there's an exemption where you don't have to have insurance to attend a home birth. So any qualified midwife can attend a home birth. But with the proviso, she doesn't provide antenatal or postnatal care. Otherwise, she'd be in breach of a registration. So, yeah, so does that answer that? Sorry, enough.
Yeah, thanks, Jane. No, that's making clear too what you were saying about the student that you are looking for insurance. If they just attended the births because there's that exemption there, otherwise they would then have to be endorsed.
If I ever get this program set up that I'm planning to, any of the midwives that work for me won't be able to attend home births I go to. They'll have to be with somebody else. Otherwise, so just got to stick to it. It's confusing. The lure around it is really confusing. I'm always looking for loopholes because it just, there's such some gorgeous midwives out there, but waiting for them to have the experience or the official experience. As you know, I don't agree with it. As Mel said, she joined straight from uni and that was awesome. She didn't have the taming of the hospital to deal with. So
so and different.
I've worked both in partnership. I've worked in 2 separate group practices and I've worked on my own. There's benefits and you can't work on your own, as Mel said. You have to have a backup of some sort. So getting back to it. So recently I had someone where I couldn't get a backup. So I actually just I had option 1, 2 and 3 and they were just colleagues that I've met through working in different hospitals that offered to be backup when I couldn't get a backup from the group practice I work in. So so there is ways around it. But you have to have, I know there's a midwife out in the rural area in New South Wales who was threatened by the hospital because she was told, there was a memo going around, so you have to be careful of your local hospital, memo going around saying that no one could attend her birth as a backup because it was in breach of something or other. So I don't know how that went in the end. I never did follow up. So you just got to be careful around making it too known, I suppose. So it's all right if you've got a supportive health service, but not if you don't.
Yeah, that follows on as well to the next question is, how do you find doctors willing to collaborate with you? What are the ins and outs of that kind of collaborative relationship? Do you have to pay them? How do you build that relationship in your area? How have you found that over the years, Jane, Melanie, and now Cara?
Well, I'll start with mine and then I'm sure Cara and Mel can give you some examples as well. In the beginning, it was impossible. Almost, pretty much. We found loopholes in the system when it first came out. We printed out little referral sheets that said we wanted referral to it had our details, the midwives on it, and all the doctor had to do was put the woman's name and her date of birth and sign it. And it just said a referral for antenatal and postnatal care from a GP, because that's went with Medicare's guidelines. And because it wasn't for a home birth, most GPs were all right with signing that. So that was one way around it. But there are more and more obstetricians out there talking to midwives across Australia that are willing to collaborate. So they're slowly changing, but it depends on where you are. Obviously, metropolitan areas are a lot easier than if you live in a rural area. So that's enough for me.
And I think it's important to note as well that it doesn't have to be one single named obstetrician or GP. So for me, I kind of do a 2-tiered process where I ask my clients if they could get a referral from a GP who can also provide shared care. And as you go, you'll find, in your area that you'll learn which GPs would be willing to do that. So for me, I found a few very reliable GPs who are happy to refer clients to me. And over time, I have sat down and purposefully spoken to them about what it means when they give a referral and what home birth is and what I do. And so they've actually become a lot more comfortable with referring women to my service because they know me and they understand what it's all for. So you can do that. Just have the women get I give them a referral template. So similar to what Jane was saying, there's just a printout and I said, look, take this to your GP they can refer you to me in the same way that they would refer someone to a pediatrician or, you know, another health specialist. And then I also encourage my clients to book into their local hospital. And if we think about the purpose as well of a collaborative agreement, is that you have a consultation and referral pathway, so that if your client develops something that you need assistance with, or that's out of your scope, or you need a different health professional, what you need to demonstrate is that you've got a pathway, a set pathway that you can easily refer them for a consultation or for extra care. So then if you think about the collaborative agreement that way, if they're booked into a hospital and they have a supportive GP who's happy to care for them in, you know, whatever circumstance, say they get a UTI or something, then you can sort of demonstrate that you've got a pathway to, you know, to help that woman find care providers that can help her with that. So yeah, I just think of the collaborative agreement as a clear referral pathway if we need to use it.
Okay, so how then are privately practicing midwives received in the hospital in case of the transfer? So we talked about now that referral pathway. So you've got the GP that you may share some of that care with. They may be booked into the hospital. Is that always the case? Do you book them in? You know, what happens in a transfer? What strategies do you use to manage this? And how much involvement do you guys have when that happens?
Okay, I can talk to that too, and then maybe throw to Cara. So it depends on which hospital you live near, how your previous interactions with them have been. You know, I've been in my area for 12 years, so I've managed to work out a sort of a working relationship with the two local hospitals. And so early on, I did find that you just were a little bit uncertain about how you would be received at hospital. Now I feel a lot more confident that when I arrive, I'm not going to be met with hostility, and the staff kind of know me and maybe know that I'm not aggressive towards them. And I try and do the right thing for them and the woman, in a sense that, you know, if a woman's booked in, I think that significantly reduces the stress of a hospital when you arrive. So for me, I wanted to make it as less stress on the hospital and as less stress on the woman. And so then that way it can be a peaceful transfer. And just because it's a change of location, it doesn't have to be this huge traumatizing event for the woman or the staff receiving us. So I have arranged sort of different pathways for different hospitals about how women can book in, so they don't actually need to go in, they can do it remotely. And then if we do need to go in, I make a point of calling ahead and giving them a full sort of handover and rundown of what's happened, so that when we arrive, there's no surprises for the hospital or the woman. And sort of everyone's expectations are as set as we can possibly make it in a transfer.
Great. Cara, do you have some points to add to that, considering it's, you know, newer for you? How is it going? How have you found that? What's happening in your area?
Look, it's variable, and it's variable because it depends on, you know, what midwife or doctor you come across when you walk into a hospital, and you can't predict that. You know, there have been times where I've walked into hospitals and walked into the open arms of a midwife that I know, and I've gone, oh, thank goodness. And other times where it's been a little bit more fraught. But I think, and again, it's another advantage, I guess, of having to do those clinical hours in the hospital system, is that I understand how they work. And I think that gives me a little bit of an advantage, and I understand how they work, and I understand what things that they're likely to do, what their process is likely to be. And I can, prepare the woman for that before we arrive. These are the things that are likely to happen. But also too, because I'm knowing what's going to happen, you know, I'm not surprised by it. However, I find most of the time it's really positive. or at least not openly hostile. You know, I think if you go in, because if you're going to a hospital, you're essentially asking for their help. You're saying, this is where we've come to. We've done everything we can at home, but we're now asking for your help. And so I think when you go in, when you go in asking and being nice about it, then people tend to respond well. I haven't had any major dramas.
Right. That's nice. That's a really nice way of putting it. I think, you know, it's one of those things that I think is always a little bit fearful. Is there some anticipation around transferring in because of that? You know, any reluctancy that you guys feel when you have to transfer in?
I think I still feel nervous when I'm transferring in, depending on what hospital I'm going to. If it's a hospital I know, I feel much more comfortable. If it's a hospital that I don't know, I still feel a bit on edge. And there's a long history of midwives being reported to APRA from, you know, during transfer situations. So there's always that is always in the back of your mind, but at the end of the day, if you've done everything that you are supposed to do, what happens will happen. Yeah, but there is a little bit of a sense of being on edge sometimes.
And so how are midwives supported to make that transition into the space of increased responsibility as the endorsed midwife? And how did you guys, I guess, experience that? Are you know, stepping from the hospital umbrella into private practice? Is that a clear enough question?
Go, Jane.
Oh, you're on mute, Jane. You're on mute.
Hang on, I must have double clicked it. Am I unmuted now? Good. Hey, yeah, look, I'm going to add, I suppose, to what Mel and Cara said, that I like Mel's approach because she worked really hard in her local area. And I think that's what needs to happen. So I work really hard with Westmead, for instance. I have no qualms about going into Westmead with anybody. But that helps because I've had such a long history with them and I know who to avoid or who to stand up to, and that's just because I know the people there. And probably there's only a couple of other hospitals I'm okay at going to. It's gotten so bad in some areas of Sydney, I will not take clients in certain areas, and I won't say which areas they are, because of the reception at the hospital if I have to transfer in for a home birth. One particular hospital, every time you go there, there's a complaint. So, yeah, so it's about building those relationships, I think, really strongly, trying to link in, meet with the midwives, meet with management as much as you can to kind of forge those sorts of relationships, so it's so much smoother sailing. And once they know you and know you're not going to do anything dangerous, because I don't know what they think we do at home, but anyway, but yeah, that kind of alleviates that. But yeah, for my comfort, yeah, I'm really nervous at going into hospitals I don't know, just because you never know what the reaction is. So, but that's why it's good to, yeah, try and, particularly if you know you're going to go to a couple, because there's several hospitals that I, you know, will potentially go to. So I work really hard at those relationships, so it's much smoother if we have to go in. Sorry, what was the rest of your question? That wasn't what you asked.
No, but that was great anyway. I guess it's, you know, you guys have already answered it in a way. It was how are midwives supported to make the transition into the space of kind of increased responsibility. It sounds like you guys support each other in a lot of ways, but how would you answer that, and what was your experience of that as you kind of became the endorsed midwife and the privately practicing midwife?
Yeah. So for me, that increased I felt the increased responsibility the moment I went from student to midwife. It didn't matter that I was still working in the hospital. That was probably the biggest transition for me. I felt it there. For me, going into private practice was it was just a relief. to be honest. It was just like, oh my God, this is where I'm meant to be. I'm so glad I'm out of the system, because I knew I was clinically sound. So that was the thing. You have to be confident in your clinical skills, and I had to be confident in my mentors, and I really was, because they were really quite experienced. So I had the trust in them and the trust that I knew what my limitations and when to ask. So that was me. Thanks.
Anyone else want to add to that, Cara?
Yeah, I will. I agree with Jane. Like, I have private midwives that have mentored me over the past year or so, and I constantly run things by them. That helps, and having that network around is just crucial, I think. To, you know, although we're in private practice, we don't work in isolation, as Mel said before, and we're always talking. You know, I talk to, you know, we have a little midwife chat group, and we're talking like daily, and hearing you not only asking your own question, but seeing others' questions and seeing responses to that teaches you as well. So I think knowing that you've got good people around you who can help you out or help you decide on the best clinical course of action sometimes.
Excellent. Okay, another tricky question, and then there's a few that aren't so tricky. But what steps do you put in place to protect yourself and your license? I.e., why can't we be unregistered midwives for all the free birthers? So how does that work?
Question. So this is something that probably a little bit of the world that I'm in. My PhD was in free birth and birth outside the system. So, okay, the rules. If you are a registered midwife, well, if you want to call yourself a midwife, you have to be registered. That word midwife is protected. So you can't tell people you're a midwife if you are not. And if you do that, I'm pretty sure that's illegal. So if you want to, as a midwife, attend free births, well, as an unregistered midwife attending free births, there's nothing wrong with that, except you can't lead the woman to believe that you can offer her midwifery care in that role, if that makes sense. We are bound by our responsibilities to our registration. It's a very confusing political structure around this for private midwives, but basically you've got APRA, which is the umbrella organisation that looks after multiple boards, including the Nursing and Midwifery Board of Australia. So we are responsible to the NMBA to fulfil our registration requirements, and part of that is the quality and safety framework. Part of that is being insured as a midwife, because that's part of our registration. If you work uninsured as a midwife, you are in breach of registration, and they could just take your registration from you. So that's why we do need to have the insurance. And if you want to work under the radar as a registered midwife providing midwifery services, then I think you would be either better off just relinquishing your registration and being really open about the fact that although you've been through the training of a midwife, you can't operate as one. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think that's fantastically clear. And so therefore, the other part of the question is, what steps do you then put in place to protect yourself and your license as a privately practicing midwife, considering there's no insurance for birth?
You have to do a really good job. So you have to be you have to be a really good midwife. You have to document absolutely everything. You have to follow every single rule and tick list that they've given us to follow. But at the end of the day, your ultimate responsibility is to the woman who is your client, but also to the NMBA, who is your registration body that keeps you working as a midwife. So it's about balancing all of that somehow, while still allowing them to have full autonomy but keeping ourselves safe. So one thing I did when I first stepped out as a private midwife, as a completely green shoot student, really, I was a student, then I was a fully fledged privately practicing midwife. I only ever took on the lowest of the lowest possible risk clients that ever approached me. And so for me, I could have faith in normal birth and go, right, for well, healthy women, most of the time birth is well, and that's totally fine. So if you're starting out and you're either not confident in your skills or you really want to kind of just work things out and learn about physiological birth, I would suggest firstly having a really solid, reliable mentor, and also being very conscious of the women that you decide to say yes to care for. So now in my career, very few things are frightening, and I think I've pretty much seen every risk factor and possible combination of requests. And although I am still regularly surprised by things, which is fine too. Yeah.
Brilliant. Cara,
yes, I was just going to add to what Mel said. I suppose that from a midwifery perspective, financially, you need to get some advice from an accountant, a lawyer or something like that. So for me personally, I've set up a trust and a company so that legally they have to go through the company and through the trust before they can get to me. It doesn't mean like financially that will stop it, but it will make it a lot more difficult. So that's just, yeah, from a financial point of view. But yeah, you're still open even with all the best legal structure. You have to be a good midwife first.
I've done the same thing as Jane. Created a company, and then what you do is you nominate a director, and we've nominated my husband as the director. In his words, he said, I'll be the director, so there's as much buffer between you and anybody else that we could possibly create. For us, all of our debt is in my name and all of our assets are in his name. So I don't know if that offers any extra protection financially, but I guess you kind of make it as hard as possible for your personal finances to be impacted if there's ever a situation where you're required to defend yourself.
Great. Okay. Thanks, guys. That definitely is a bit of a tricky one, but I guess one that's on a lot of people's minds because you're not covered by that insurance. You're not covered by that hospital umbrella. So, you know, if hospitals can get insurance, why can't privately practicing midwives? How does that work?
I could probably help with that. So only because so I did I think it was about 2016. I worked for nearly a year with the Australian College of Midwives as a project officer for the project was to create an insurance package for privately practicing midwives, and the government gave the ACM money to do so, and so I was part of that process. The problem is that insurers are there to make a profit. And so with so few private midwives in the pool, so if you think about maybe about 200 midwives who are interested in purchasing this kind of insurance, we can't possibly pay them enough money for this insurance to make it financially worthwhile for them to insure us. So if there's an issue and they need to pay $3 million to somebody, that's a massive loss for a company to, so it's not financially worth it for an insurance company. There's also not a lot of precedent in Australia for setting up such a thing as in other countries that have a lot more private midwives or a longer kind of history of home birth midwifery.
Okay, so I guess down to the more kind of practical issues then. How much does insurance cost? How many women per month do you guys need to take? What are the setup costs for all of the equipment that you need to bring to a birth? Yeah, so some of the more practical financial aspects. Who wants to answer?
Oh, I'll go because I just did it. The setup costs actually aren't that high. I mean, there are a few things that are really expensive. You know, things like Dopplers are expensive. That's probably the most expensive piece of equipment I have. So in terms of like actually outlaying capital to set up, it's actually not that expensive. The insurance that we have is income dependent. So you can start at quite a low level, and I think the lowest level is about $200 a month. So as it's a business that we're running, so as with any business, there's always a risk when you start out. So, you know, I was paying insurance for several months before I had any, and, you know, having to pay for all of that equipment to set up my kit before I had any income coming in. So it's the same as any other business. There's always an outlay, but, you know, I would say it would be less than a few $1,000s to start up, really. And I'm not very good at the financial side, and I haven't added it all up. It's all in a spreadsheet. I just haven't run the number.
I did a little bit of maths yesterday because I did anticipate this question. So like you said, a Doppler, maybe between $800 to $1,000 bucks. If you think of the rest of your kit, if you're going to provide birth pools and bits and pieces, I reckon allow maybe $2,500 to have all of the actual equipment that you might need for your gear. Then if you're only having a small caseload, a few $1,000s for insurance, or if you can have a big caseload, $7,000 to $10,000 for your insurance a year. Think about also hiring an oxygen tank as well. The medication that you need, which you can buy from a pharmacy and prescribe to get that, but again, that's a cost. Consider online platform for advertising, how that, if you want to do that. So if you have a website, it might be, you know, a certain fee. What else? Car expenses or expenses that you need to outlay for your clinic space. Yeah, that's a few things that I knocked around in terms of cost.
Super helpful. So then you just work out as you go. I guess, you know, how many clients are you able to take per month, you know, with burnout, with holidays, with the costs, etc. Obviously it's working for you guys, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it, like any other business. So how do you, I guess one of the questions was, you know, because obviously it's a lot of on-call work, how do you manage that workload if you have small children? How do you get a break? How do you not suffer from burnout? And yeah.
I don't want to talk too much, but I have small children, so maybe I can help. So we have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old, and we also homeschool them. So I am with my children almost every hour of the day. So how do we do it? I have a really great support network of people who are aware of my work and who are readily available to help if I need to. My husband also only works part-time, and next year it will all be in his own business. So we will be both at home and balancing that between ourselves. In terms of how many clients you need to make a living, so it depends on how expensive your living is. But I have done a little bit of maths on this, and if you calculate roughly how many hours or how much time you give to each client, I've calculated it to roughly be 40 hours over their care, a very rough rudimentary kind of thing. So if you take on 4 women a month, so when you book them, you kind of book them per June month, then you might consider that 4 women equals 4 weeks of care over the time. And give or take, somebody might need less, somebody might need more. And then there's all the business stuff that goes along with travel and all that kind of stuff. So then if you want to work a part-time load, you might think, okay, well, maybe a part-time load is 2 clients plus a couple of backups. And if you want to work more, a full-time load, and imagine what that will mean for your time, for might look a bit more like a full-time load. But there are midwives who take on way more than that. In my life circumstance with small children, although I have support, 4 would be a maximum sort of amount for me. And then when you're planning holidays, you have to choose them well in advance. And then if anyone rings that is due around that time, you have to be strong enough to say no. So you have to just go, I'm having a holiday. And it happened to me recently. I had a call from somebody who said that she had been following me on Instagram for 2 years and knew that when she got pregnant, I was the midwife for her. And I said, I'm having March off. And she cried. And you just think, oh, maybe I'm not having March off. And then my husband in the background going, no. So if you don't be disciplined with it, you will work all year without a break and you'll never have a holiday. So you just have to, yeah, that's hard. That's the hard part. You have to be disciplined if you don't want to burn out. If you want to burn out, just say yes to everybody and never take a holiday.
Great. Okay. Thanks for that. Very helpful. We have a statement from a lady named Jo. I'll just open it up for her to say something. Jo, do you just want to unmute yourself?
Hi everyone. I'm new to private practice, just having ventured out of the public system this year, and I'm up in Queensland, and I just wanted to speak to a couple of the things that have already been talked about, because, you know, sometimes people do things slightly different and have different experiences, and it might give some of you who are looking to get into private practice, you know, some ideas of other options as to how to do it as well. So a little bit about me. I actually kind of fell into private practice by accident. It was never my plan to do at all when I did my BMid. I wanted to do public MGP. And so after I did my grad year in Adelaide, then I did go straight into MGP caseload rural North Queensland. And I'm just, when we were talking about, you know, the having to get the 5,000 hours, and how do you do that in a hospital setting? I know it's tricky to get a caseload position as grads sometimes, but if you can do it, you know, and you need to get those hours, it's a really good option because it helps you with the continuity model that you're going to end up in. So that really helped me to be able to step into private practice and it not be a completely different experience, I suppose. The other thing that I wanted to mention was that and I don't know what the other ladies, obviously some of you are independent, but we have a practice up here. There's 4 of us who work out of it. We have a collaborative arrangement with our local hospital. So we can actually still be, even if our women transfer in or if they choose a hospital birth, we're still able to be their clinical practitioner in the hospital, which is really, really fortunate to be able to have that. And I have to say the collaborative arrangement does take a lot of work, like the others were saying about maintaining those relationships and things. But I'm really lucky in that this was the hospital that I worked in up until April this year. So when I go as a private midwife, the staff know me and know how I am, how I work, and they trust me as well. So that's, you know, something to think about if you're thinking, how can I go about it? Next year as well, I wanted to just quickly mention, particularly to you, Jane, because next year our practice is taking 2 midwives who are not yet endorsed, and we've explored a new insurance product with MIGA to be able to do that. It is very expensive. It's more for the 2 of them than it is for the 4 of us for a year. I think it's about $25,000 for a year to be able to have them come on and to practice with us. But that's the only way to grow our business. So, you know, there are lots of midwives out there who are not able to move into private practice, but, you know, don't want to be in the hospital. So we want to be able to provide a space for them. And the other thing we were just talking about with parenting and, you know, juggling the work-life balance and all that stuff. I'm a single mum of 3, so, and having done MGP full-time, I think private practice is actually easier than that. I'm definitely on call. I'm on call every day, but I certainly work a lot less than when I had 40 women a year in the public system. And my children are older, so they're in their teens. So if, you know, you're thinking that that's something that might be possible for you because your children are getting a bit older, you just got to teach them how to survive without you for a few hours, honestly. They get their bus to school. My eldest has just learnt to drive, and worst case, they can make some beans on toast for dinner, you know. It all works out in the end.
Thanks, Jo. That's really great. And I guess, you know, that's a good point as well as with what, you know, Jane was talking about. One of the questions was, you know, that I find the Medicare requirements unattainable, and it'll be approximately 6 years to get the hours. I'm not prepared to work in the system that long, and it's not a model of care I align with. What are my options? So, you know, I guess, Jo, you're in Queensland, and there's a few different rules there. I'm not quite sure of the difference there. And Jane, you're looking into that here. I guess, you know, that obviously encompasses probably young kids as well, because a lot of, you know, midwives with young kids, they're not able to work those full-time hours.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And so it is, you know, then such a long way potentially away. So I guess as far as in relationship to that question, we just keep watching this space, Jane, for any updates from you guys. And you know,
shop around as well. I mean, I've moved states and, you know, around the state several times to be able to do the job that I want to do. And that's not always feasible for everyone either. But there's another practice up here in Toowoomba who take midwives who are not yet endorsed. I don't know the ins and outs of their insurance or how they've got that arrangement, but, you know, places are doing things differently. So it might just be a case of, you know, talking to as many people as you can and seeing where there's an opportunity.
Great. Okay.
Yeah,
Brilliant.
I'll just add to that, Jo, that I used to run a medical centre. Well, it was a midwifery and medical centre, and even when Vero stopped offering the second insurance policy, I was still able to employ midwives. So I'm sure it'll happen, but I had GPs who worked for me, whereas this time I have no GPs, so it's just proving a little bit more challenging. And yeah, MIGA haven't responded, but I'm trying to get the cheaper option that I had last time. It'll be a bit more cost effective.
Yeah, they're not always the quickest at getting back to you, I'm discovering.
I guess one of the last questions I've got for the panel is, you know, what advice and strategies can you give to us, you know, believing in physiological birth? How do we cope being inside the hospital system and not give up? It's, you know, I guess it's been a theme that's just come over and over in some of the questions and some of the students I've been talking to, because particularly as students, we feel like we can't advocate either. We're there, we're learning, and you know, it becomes incredibly disheartening, feeling like, oh my gosh, we've got like these 3 years and then another 3 years full time, and then what, you know? So, you know, finding a mentor, going through that, will we be crushed by the system in that time, is the kind of general feeling in our hearts and souls. So yeah, what advice can you guys give us to get through?
I guess I can speak to that a little bit. Yeah, you will be a little bit crushed. That's just the reality of it. And having good people around you to talk to and debrief, like find your people, stick with your people, and talk to each other and support each other. At the end of the day, you, just by being who you are, by being a midwife who believes in normal physiological birth and who wants to support that, and who believes in women and has faith in women, that means that you're already making a difference to every woman that you come into contact with. You are the midwife who will be kind to them. You are the midwife who will advocate for them, because although you feel like you can't as a student, because you're not the midwife looking after her, you're working with the midwife looking after her. But as soon as you graduate and as soon as you put on those New South Wales Health scrubs, that immediately changes. It does immediately. You are now the midwife in charge of that case. And so you do have a greater ability to advocate, and you do have a greater ability to make a difference to that woman. As a student, if you can't do anything to change the situation for somebody, you can be kind, and that will make a difference to the way that woman views her birth, because of the way that you treat her. And it does absolutely make a huge, huge difference. Just being the student midwife who was kind, who held her hand, or who mopped her brow, or who talked to the husband while shit was going down, excuse my French. You know, you are making a difference just by being the midwives that you are, or the student midwives that you are. And I think that at the hard bits, it's really important to remember that. Yeah.
Beautiful, thanks. Cara, any other tips? Mel, Jane, in regards to that? I mean, you said it so beautifully.
Oh, we're both jumping in. I'll go first. Look, the one thing I remember many years ago, I saw a midwife. I don't know if any of you guys know her. Name's Carolyn Flint. She's a UK midwife and was quite innovative. I'm assuming she still practices, I don't know. But the one thing that stuck with me that she mentioned that she did is she knew her stuff. So she knows about, the side effects of epidural. She knew about, the effects of synthetic oxytocin, and she carried that evidence around with her. So much so she carried the latest evidence in her locker. So every time she had any challenge, she'd just pull it out and go, well, look. And yeah, so that kind of stuck with me. Know your stuff and have the backing of the evidence to help support what you do, because the evidence supports, home birth, it supports physiological birth, it supports all that stuff. So yeah, that's just my tip.
I would also, sorry Mel, I'm jumping in front of you, but I would also add, as much as we hate them, know those hospital policies back to front, because if you want to skirt around the edges of them, you've got to know them really well. And because there's a lot of stuff that goes on in hospital that it's not in the policy. It's just what gets done. It's just what we do here. And if you know what the policy says, you can make someone very quiet very quickly by saying that's not in the policy. The policy says this. That's my
brilliant. No, they're all brilliant tips. Mel.
Okay, my tip. So basically, students, you're feeling this way because you're good people. And you know that what's happening to women in the hospital is not right. We know it's not right in a physiological sense. We know that it's not right because it's not often what women want. We know it's not right because you're not taught that is the right way at uni. So what you're feeling, it's called moral distress. I'm actually currently in the middle of the moral distress literature in my job at Western Sydney Uni. And one of the big reasons that midwives get burnt out is the pressure of ongoing moral distress at the disconnection between what they know they should be doing and what they have to be doing because they're employees of the hospital. So basically you have to find a way to manage the moral distress that is layering upon you until you get out. So like what Cara said, be kind, do your best to learn advocacy strategies. So this is the place where you are constantly confronted with the opportunity to advocate. So actually you're either consciously or unconsciously going to develop really good skills at how to cleverly advocate for women while still respecting the staff members, while, helping everyone to still get along. But you know, almost subverting the system in a way they don't even realize, like a ninja. And so you're actually gaining some kind of skill by being in there. So if you go in there with the idea that you're going to use this time to gather knowledge about the hospital, but also gather skills as to how you can subvert that whole situation. And then it's not wasted time. You're actually becoming a more skilled private midwife by being able to do that.
All right, brilliant. I want to also open it up if anyone's got any questions at all that haven't been answered as yet. Do you want to unmute yourself or put them in the chat? I can ask them.
Can I just add something quickly to the supporting yourself in the system that we were just talking about? I have just finished my Masters in Primary Maternity Care through Griffith Uni. And I don't know that I would have lasted the time in the system if it wasn't for having a place outside of the system to be able to connect with the people who shared the same values that I did. Further study is not going to be for everyone, and probably it's the last thing on your mind right now when you come into the end of a BMID, but yeah, it was incredible, and there was always someone that I could talk to or who reminded me why I was doing it, and reminded me why, like the others have said, why it was important that people like me were in the system, because can you imagine what it would be like otherwise? And so those people really helped me to keep putting one foot in front of the other. And you do conjure up your own midwifery family, and they pick you up when you're down, and you do the same for them. And it's essential that you have those people, and even if you don't have them right now, you'll find your people, because you kind of end up the ones having a natter in the corridor at work about how crazy the shift is and how different you want it to be. You'll find your people.
Beautiful, thanks Jo. I've just got a question come in about like part of the setup costs. Sorry, it's just but one of the questions is what's the advantages or disadvantages of going to see the women at their houses or setting up your own practice in your own house or office studio? Can that be done? What's the pros and cons with that? Can you guys speak to that? Maybe Jane, I think you've done a lot of different systems.
Yeah, look, I can. I mean, obviously the ideal model is that all the care is done in the woman's home. But from a practical point of view, particularly in Sydney, for me, sometimes even travelling a distance, you know, let's say from, my clinic is in North Parramatta, and I went to Lidcombe one day, which is generally a 15-minute drive. Took me 45 minutes one way in traffic to get there. So you're spending many hours in the car. So you've got to kind of balance that, and you have to make a choice. You know, I work with a midwife who does totally home visits. I do obviously all postnatal visits in the woman's home, but most antenatal visits are in my clinic, simply because that enables me to offer the service that I do. Because if I was travelling around, I'd have to see less women. So yeah, that's my thoughts.
And is that you have a clinic in your home, or do you have a separate?
No, this is my clinic here. I don't know if you can see. I'll see if I can. So yeah, this is, I'm probably making you all dizzy. So this is I've set up this room. It's just near my home. It's only 3 minutes down the road from where I live. So I've got a clinic room that I've set up specifically. So where women come here, and there's plenty of parking, and it's, for me to get to Westmead Hospital, if I have to go, it takes me 4 minutes from here. So it's quite really centrally located. But yeah, so, but I just got that because I run pregnancy.com.au and Birth International as well. So I've got, there's a warehouse out the back here. So I've got the front half for my midwifery and the back half for all the stuff.
Amazing.
That's just me. I've got a special
What
situation.
about you other ladies, Cara, Mel?
I do home visits for everything, which means that I spend more time in my car some days than I do in my house. I live in the Blue Mountains, like Mel, a bit further up the road. And so and because I'm starting out in practice, haven't been as restrictive as I probably should be on the distance that I travel. That's starting to change, but it is an easy and cost-effective way to start up, because you don't have that you don't have to, I don't live in a central location. So I couldn't ask the women that I serve to come and see me. It's easier for me to go to them. And it's an easy and cheap way to set up, because I don't have that overhead of either renting a clinic space or setting one up. So in terms of starting out, it was simple and straightforward for me to say, I'm just going to do home visits. And I like it too, because you are getting to see the women where they live and where they feel most comfortable. But I can understand what Jane is saying too. Like, I do spend a lot of time on the road, and my toll bill is frightening.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
I sit somewhere in the middle of those two situations. I have a home office, and it has a separate entryway so that people aren't walking through the house, and there's a bathroom right next door. So that has, when I first started out, I was doing a kind of a combination. So I would see women early on at my home office, but then some women, if they're in a circumstance where they either don't drive or, they've got a lot of children and they just can't bring them all. So I would just be responsive to the woman's needs. So sometimes if they needed all home visits, then that was within my capacity. But then if some women want to come out of their homes, that they don't want to have to get their house ready or something for a visitor. So, I just sort of ask them, what would you like to do? These are the options. Because I do live in the Blue Mountains, sometimes people are keen for a trip. And they're like, no, we'll come, it's great, we don't mind. But yeah, now I do a lot of the care in the home. That's mostly a little bit of a luxury of the fact that I now in my career can choose to only take women who live close to me. So I don't travel very far for my clientele. So that makes a big difference. And I'm in the mountains. I don't have the fluctuations in traffic like Jane would have, where, it basically, if it takes half an hour, it will always take half an hour. So that's good. I just think if you have the luxury of being responsive to your clients, like if you have a space that you can easily use almost for free at your home, or have the option of going to visit, that's a good situation. But, you'll attract the clients that appreciate that way of doing things, So, I think there's pros and cons to both. And we do have to balance what will work for the midwife, but also for women. So, there's no right answer.
Great. Okay, I've had another question come through. I'm trying to add up hours. What is the best way to keep track of them, and how are they signed off or recorded when it comes to applying for endorsement?
So what I had to do I worked at 2 different hospitals when I was accruing my hours, and I had to get statements of service from my midwifery managers showing what I'd done. It adds up quite quickly if you're working full time, and so you base that on, I was working full time, so that's 38 hours a week, and so you could literally just count off the weeks and go, this is how many weeks I've done, this is about how many hours I've done, and when they're signed off, you're literally getting your manager to write, you've been working in a full-time or part-time capacity, how many hours per week that you've been contracted for from this date to this date. It's really straightforward. It seems like it's a really hard thing to do, but it's actually really not. It's not. It seemed to me when I was looking, oh God, but it's actually not a very hard thing to do at all.
The other people that you can talk to is payroll. They know exactly how many hours you've worked. So yeah, you can ask if they can tell you where you're up to.
Brilliant. Anyone else want to unmute who's got a question? No? Okay. Oh, hang on. They've come through. We've got another one come through. So if you've done those hours as a second midwife, how do you record those?
I'll answer that. You have to still get some sort of statement of service, or it could be a stat deck. Is that right, Mel? From memory, I think we did stat decks, didn't we, initially?
Yeah, you can get a stat deck, or even, I have a feeling that even just being able to prove that you worked with another midwife, even with a letter or something, be enough. It's a bit vague. Actually, all the requirements for private midwives are vague. So anyway.
Cara, do you have any details on that? And another question's come for you as well. When you started working, did you have to also work part-time in the hospital for financial reasons?
The first question I can't answer because I did all of my hours for endorsement in the hospital. So I didn't have to sign, I didn't have to do any stat decks or anything like that. But I would suggest actually talking to UPRA, who are the ones who are going to judge whether you've met your hours or not. And so if you think that if you want to know whether you've, what you have got, what paperwork you have fulfills their requirements, then ask them. That would be the simplest solution. In terms of, and yes, I did, is the answer to the second question. When I started working, I remained at my local hospital in the casual pool, and I took casual shifts when I first started. I had to sign, because it's New South Wales Health, I had to apply for secondary employment, which they gave me permission to have a second job. And because it was a conflict of interest, I had to declare that I wouldn't look after any women that I was looking after privately if they came into the hospital that I was working at when I was on shift. So just a few things like that. But yeah, I did. I took casual shifts for the first 6 months until I didn't need to anymore, and it worked really well. I just didn't take shifts when I had my own clients due to give birth.
I've got another question. How do I find a great mentor? ? What is the best way to approach midwife for possible mentorship? Thanks everyone for sharing. You guys are a bunch of amazing midwives.
Oh, well, having had to seek out a mentor myself as a little young student, be persistent and annoying. And so you basically just have to choose. So you've really got to hunt around. So you have a quick Google. Probably now you can find people by Google. Back then I had to ask people. And so quick Google about who's in your area, get a vague idea of who you maybe might want to be mentored by, and then just email them and say, hey, this is my situation. I want to be a private midwife. How can you help me? And, we want to help everybody, us private midwives. So, and I know that Jane through Birth International has a workshop on how to be a private midwife, so you can certainly do that. I run a year-long mentorship program online for anybody in Australia who wants to get into private practice. So there's those opportunities, but basically just hunt down for somebody that you really want to be with and ask them. It's not complicated, especially with the internet.
Brilliant. So how do you guys work out a payment schedule with your clients? Is it difficult not receiving a regular salary every month? That's the next one.
I charge a flat rate. So for the whole care episode for pregnancy, birth, and the postnatal period. I know there are other midwives who do it differently, who might charge per antenatal visit or have different ways. So everyone works it a little bit differently, I think. That's why working as a casual midwife in the hospital helped in those early months. So I was getting some money in, but I'm also fortunate in that, I'm partnered, so we're not a one income household. So that definitely is an advantage that I had. We weren't relying on my income to pay the mortgage. So that I acknowledge is a complete privilege and might not necessarily be possible for others in different circumstances.
For me, I have a business account, so I do the same as Cara, a flat fee for everybody, and then I talk to each client about how they can best pay and how it's best for them. So I don't have like a sort of schedule of when they have to pay and how much it has to be. I do often ask them if they could pay before their baby is born, so that they don't have to chase down a postnatal woman and ask for money, because that just seems horrid. So then, we kind of come to an individual agreement about how they're going to pay their bill. And then if you be really strict about setting up an individual account, like a business account, so that it's not all just coming into your personal account and you're seeing all this money and spending it. You actually have a business account, and then I don't expect to use that money until I've completely discharged the woman, and then I count it as my money, and then I only just take a wage as to what I need, and then there's kind of a cushioning amount of money sitting in the business account for business expenses and then possible unexpected personal expenses.
Great. And what's the range that you guys charge for the complete package? That's another question.
I'll go first. Loaded. I charge $6,000. Yeah, I charge $6,000 for a complete package.
I charge $6,150.
Yeah, I'm about 6 as well. I think most of the midwives in the Sydney region charge a similar amount. Yeah.
Great. And then with Medicare rebates at the moment, it depends, doesn't it, on how much antenatal care and postnatal care provided. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So they get back per visit. So you get back about 45 for an antenatal visit, 67 for a postnatal. But once they hit the safety net, they get a little bit more back for each episode of care. Look, it varies from woman to woman depending on their financial circumstances. If they hit the safety net earlier, they get more money back. It depends if it goes over, because the Medicare safety net's worked out on a calendar year. So if it goes over 2 years, like from this year to next year, they'll get less. But it averages somewhere between $1,200 to $1,600 in general per woman. If they transfer into hospital, say if you've got visiting rights like we do at Westmead, from a home birth, they may get an extra $565 if they're a private patient though, and if they're going as a private.
Jane, we didn't touch on visiting rights. Can you explain how that works?
So yeah, with the visiting rights, so basically in New South Wales, as far as I know, Westmead is still the only hospital. I may not be correct, but as far as I know, it is. So we fought for that for about 7 years, I think it took. But the way it works is that the women actually are booked in under the midwife at the hospital. So there's no doctor on the sticker, but we have to have a collaborative relationship. So if, the woman needs extra help, the obstetrician comes in, but she still remains under us in the hospital system. So it enables women who plan a home birth. So I still have some of my home birth clients. I do purely hospital births as well now, particularly for high risk women. But if a woman wants that option, she can, if she's planning a home birth, in case of the event of transfer, it doesn't matter where she lives in Sydney, we'll try to get to Westmead as long as it's not an emergency, and then I can continue to provide care in the hospital. So.
Okay, so therefore that allows you to take on higher risk clients.
Yeah.
As a privately practicing midwife.
That's right.
And birth in the hospital and not at home.
Yeah.
And how does that work with the insurance? Is that just you're with the hospital insurance, you're with your insurance?
No, you're with your own insurance in the hospital. So your own insurance covers the hospital, and you still obviously don't get anything for the home birth, but yeah. So.
Okay, so if she's birthing in the hospital, is she covered then by the hospital insurance?
No, you're covered by your insurance because you're a private, you work exactly like a private obstetrician does.
Okay.
So, I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to have to go. Okay.
Do have to wrap it up now for everybody. It has been such an amazing time. There are more questions coming in, so we might end up having to run another event. But I wanted to thank you, Jane and Mel and Cara, for all your wonderful time, and thanks for your input as well, Joe. And yeah, for Amy for organising it. So thank you guys so much.
Yeah.
And we'll wrap it up there.
Okay. See ya.
Thank you.